Paul Lambert, multi-Academy Award-winning visual effects supervisor. Most importantly, though, the man responsible for the visual effects of Dune Part 1 and Part 2. Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me today.
I am just so grateful, first and foremost, as a fan of Frank Herbert's original novel, to just see it receive this kind of big screen adaptation in a very believable setting that we as viewers can just fully immerse ourselves and get lost in. So, first and foremost, I got to just give you my thanks for bringing uh, his vision to life through your work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And like working with Denise is always a pleasure. The man has the film in his head, so like it just allows us to work it in a certain way because like we know that things aren't going to change that much in post. So like it does allow us to focus on specific things to like shoot in a way which is always going to be beneficial for visual effects.
Yeah. And now, so you work on Dune Part 1. You guys win the Oscar for it. Everyone's talking about how it blends photorealism with effects that, quite frankly, people can't even sometimes even tell the difference. There were all these visual effects breakdowns where people didn't know where the visual effects began and where they ended. And it sounds like from what you're saying that when you work with a director like Denis, that makes your job a lot easier. Somebody who really has it ingrained into how visual effects work, essentially, when they're shooting and how they're going to be integrated later on. Can you tell me a little bit about just that process of working with a director who understands that collaborative nature has to occur earlier in the process as opposed to, oh, we'll just fix it in post later?
Yeah, yeah. Look, that is one significant thing about the Dune movies is that there wasn't a HOD or like somebody on set who thought that like we could go off and fix something in post, which like tends to have sloppy consequences. When you think about it, like when you try and think like that. So everybody's got this urge to do the best that they possibly can, and like I'm a great believer in that. Like you're working with like some of the world's best, so like you want to get as much as you can from them to then take into post and hopefully not mess it up and continue the great visuals. But yeah, working with Denis, it's like like if he ever comes to me with a question and he's asking about a particular visual effects, if like he can see that I'm a little bit cautious of doing something in that particular way, like he'll change it. Like he understands that what he doesn't want ever is for a visual in his movie to take you out of the story. It's all about the screenplay. It's all about the actual narrative. So, and that's what my job is with him is to try to produce visuals which like you're not going to know that we've done something to it. Now, obviously, we've got spaceships, we've got we've got worms, we've got all sorts of things going on. So, like trying to ground those in reality as much as possible means, during pre-production, when we're in prep and all of the HODs are together and we're all together for about 4 or 5 months, and basically we constantly talk about how we're going to achieve something, and the push is always to, all right, if we were to do this totally practically, how could we do this? And that's the approach, knowing that like I will then come in and adjust and augment and fix, and you know, you go into things knowing that like, I do have to extend dunes to make them taller, but like the process is always to like try to get something in camera, which then I then augment, and everybody's on board with that idea. Now, you know, you can come across producers who question, well, why go to all this trouble if, like, in the end, you're going to be replacing it all in the CG? And I always counter that like once you have something grounded and reference to actually follow to, even if you are going to replace it, you don't spend all your money and cycles in trying to make something believable because you know what is real. So you copy what is
Yeah.
real, and then you have time to iterate to to get the director's vision. But so without that, you can go round and round in circles very easily. So, and that's what everybody is on board with, like, to like try to get the best possible basis for me to be successful in visual effects.
Yeah, no, most definitely. So you guys win the Oscar for part one, and you know part two is coming. Now, one thing I commend Denis for is that even though these were not shot back to back on the same shooting schedule, there was a break in between before you guys went back into the desert, and you guys started work on the second film. There is visual continuity between both films that make it seem like it was all one giant production. So for you guys, where the technology has advanced a couple of years since the first film, is there like a temptation to want to use, like, I guess really what I'm getting at is like, how do you balance wanting to use better techniques but not betray the visual language and what was previously set up in the first film, because you don't want it to be such a gargantuan leap or that it would betray what audiences are already familiar
Yeah.
with.
Yeah. Like it's basically staying grounded with the techniques. Like, you'd think that on June 2, coming from June 1, that like we could just bring back all of the assets and like, just like interrupt on those, but every single thing changed.
Mm,
And I believe we've only got the one shot of the original ornithopter in the movie, because like the ornithopters changed to the Arcanum ones. We got a lot closer to the worm, so like the worm had to be upgraded. Every spaceship is different.
and the
Every
eyes too. You guys use a
yeah,
new
yeah,
technique
totally.
on the eyes now.
Yeah. So for that, like, we'd gone through, I think it was something like 300 or 280 shots in June part one, and the actual company Wiley rotoscoped by hand, each eye with the pupil, the sclera, and like, did a fantastic job. So like,
Yeah.
you get those mats, and then after that, we would just tint them according to the scenes. And but so I thought, well, we have all this data from the first movie. There's going to be a way in which like we can reuse some of that, and that's exactly what we did. Like, basically, we took we we took all that information of the eyes and the mats, and we trained a model on just those eyes and mats, so that we so that when we had footage from June 2, we could apply that model to it, and we would get those mats automatically. And it worked for about 40% of the shots. And like, we had about 1,000 shots in June 2. So doing about 400 of them automatically was a godsend, basically, because of just the amount of work. But like, as to all the other techniques, obviously, we, for the sand, like, we had done some sand simulations in the first, and like, you saw the odd crash through dunes, but usually they were at dusk time, so like, it was all a little bit hidden. This time, Denis wanted Paul to be riding the worm out in the desert, in the bright sun. So like, there wasn't going to be any hiding.
No.
So like you know we shot that in a sand colored dome on a gimbal with a piece of the worm built, and like, basically moved around on that to like try to get a sense of the desert light onto the character, and then obviously replace the backgrounds with aerials and CG. But that approach immersed you in that world as if we had shot that in the desert. And things like you did Prime with the infrared photography.
Hmm.
Like, you can prep so much. But what caught us out was, so from the early tests, when Denny and Greg had come up with this idea, we had decided that like, we wanted to test this process extensively, because from the early test footage, like, we had a shot of two crew members. Both were in a black t-shirt, and one of them turned white. and like you just don't know why it did it because of the fabric or the heat or so like basically we had to test everything. So like I even tested all of the gaffer tape which like I would use for tracking markers because like just to have an understanding of what red went to and what green went to and all the different tones. Now we tested everything, but on the day we actually started with this arena sequence as a pre-shoot, and we were doing the fight with the other fighters, and one appeared, and to the naked eye, looked perfectly fine. In IR, it was covered in tattoos,
Hmm.
absolutely covered in tattoos, and basically he'd gone through hair and makeup, and they had covered it all. But with IR lights and like the IR camera, you got to see everything. So like
Yeah.
I kind of panicked, and like I said to Denise, well, does this fit your aesthetic? He said no. So, but by that time it was too late. So like we had to shoot it, and then like we had to deal with it in post. But yeah, like you could have as much prep as 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 you want, but like there's always going to be something which can catch you out. All the crowd work we did, like we tried to have as much practically as possible repeat crowds, but obviously there are CG extensions everywhere. So
Hmm.
like the balance of like trying to make the audience believe that like this is something which like we shot, which like we completely shot.
Yeah. Emperor Shaddam's the fourth's ship when it arrives on Arrakis. It's got that reflective surface, so you have to get this spherical shape, but then also have it capturing the planet itself in this 360 view. Now, I've seen for lighting references, I've seen spheres get used
Yeah,
for reference in visual effects quite
yeah,
often.
yeah.
But can you tell me like what technique was deployed to create that effect?
Well, so when we first saw the concepts from Patrice for the ship, we thought, okay, this is going to be interesting because, you know, visual effects and its budget is a balancing act as to some shots which like you can you can do and like won't like it involve like a massive army crowd fight, but because this thing was completely reflective, even if we had a shot which was just the ship you would get to see the battle behind, and that there just adds zeros to everything. So credit to Dine to like come up with like some techniques of like filming other shots and then being able to reflect that into the environment so that like it so that the budget didn't skyrocket because those things
Yeah.
can be super expensive just when it's just a reflection. But yeah, that whole ship was a beautiful design, and one thing which didn't make the cut was how the ship attaches to the tent. So originally we had an animation of the ship actually pulling up the tent, kind of like an accordion, but
Mhm.
unfortunately didn't make it to the movie. But like just like having all of that silver and all of that chrome everywhere, yeah, did present some challenges for like trying to get some of those shots through.
I can only imagine. I know you talked about the sand before. Sand has got to be, I imagine, a really, really tough element because obviously it's extremely detailed, very tiny, but it has reflective surfaces for light as well. How would you satisfied would you say you are with how advanced simulations have become with capturing the realities of sand?
Yeah, look, honestly, I think things have come a long way. It
Hmm.
still does take a long time to actually render those things. So,
Hmm.
like the guys and girls at Dina came up with a great way so that like myself and Denis could see early progress on that. So rather than trying to simulate billions of particles of like sand, we we actually started with like a much bigger sand grain, which was basically the size of a of a of a beach ball, basically. So like basically like you'd have the worm traveling and like would see all these beach balls passing off, and then like I would show Denise, okay, these beach balls then become the tennis balls, which then become the tiny, tiny, tiny little particulates, so that like he could get a sense of the performance early on because what's if you didn't have that, and like
Hmm.
you just and like I showed Denis the final render, and he had a change. Well, it takes so much time and is incredibly expensive because like these things do take time to actually render, and like having that like kind of proxy process of like using a ball pit also helped Dino because we had established that like the worm travels at about 300 kilometers or miles an hour.
Hmm.
It hauls, it goes super fast. And what they found early on in their initial test was that when that creature hit a dune, the dune would literally explode. So basically, the sand would go absolutely everywhere. And like it was only after somebody had the idea that okay, if we open the like worm's mouth as it comes into the dune, basically that helps the solver to bring everything a little bit calmer. You know, it still gives you a nice cinematic a nice cinematic burst, but it's no longer the end of the movie, right? Where like everything explodes. So like
Right.
using those like proxy basic ball plate sizes help them to for, get to basically establish the speed and like the overall performance. And then after that, we could then art direct it to our heart's content because those passes were like quite quick.
I imagine this might be a little sacrilegious asking a question like this, but I want you to break the illusion and tell me a hidden visual effect that audiences would not necessarily
Oh,
know is
Brian,
a
oh my
visual effect within Dune Part 2.
goodness. Oh my goodness. You should have prepped me for this one, man. Like there are so many. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Let me think. So I guess I guess when we're in the arena and how
Hmm.
we shot that with the shadow. So we shot the arena in between two stages, right? So we filled an area between two of the stages in Budapest and just covered it in white sand, and we had really hot sunny days, and like it was the floor was electric, and being in that was like it was basically like being in a boiler, and
Ugh.
to the point that where like Fade's uh, skull cap would like sometimes come off because it was so hot in there. But because we shot this throughout various times of day, like you had shadows on the ground from the studios, and I was super worried about removing those shadows because like I know coming from a comp background that like if I'm going to change a background and it's an extreme of light. So like if I've shot something dark and I want to put something light, or if I shot something light and I want to put something dark, it's never going to look right. It doesn't matter what we can do,
Yeah.
it's never going to look right. And the audience won't know what it is, but something doesn't sit right. So like, so I was a little bit concerned about that. So, but what we came up with in the end was that we embraced those shadows from the studios and played them as if they were from the virtual stadium. Now, it didn't make sense, to have these square shapes, but just so long as we captured the performers going in and out of that light, and what was behind them stayed the same, that helped the visual effects no end to like give it the integration. I'm not sure I'm answering your question
No, no,
properly.
no. This is great.
This is more of a technique that like that like I'm a huge believer that I will break the continuity of a background rather than sacrifice the integrity of the visual of the image. Like
Hmm.
I'll change backgrounds ever so slightly so that the comp doesn't look bad. So
Yeah.
and that was the guiding force behind that particular sequence to like try to make sure that the shadows behind the characters, like where it was black and where it was white, it stayed according to what we shot in the studio, and then after that we we would sometimes extend it and change the shape of it slightly, but not interfere where like the characters were. And it totally worked. Now, if you were to analyze this, shot by shot, it wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. But this is a movie, so like you kind of get away with that. And there are, even in that vein, like in the opening sequence, in the opening 10 minutes, when like we're in the red eclipse. That scene was shot in about 6 or 7 different places. So when you look in one way, it's
Oh
one
wow.
way. It's somewhere. When you look in the other way, it's somewhere else. It's so it was a logistical nightmare. But again, it's a movie, and you kind of get away because once you're immersed in the movie, then like you don't really pay attention to what's in the background and that kind of thing. If you were to analyze it, I'm quite sure you would you would figure it out. But that's the that's the beauty of like producing cinema. You're taking somebody on an adventure and they totally believe it, you know?
Yeah. Well, we believe it so much that you know when you hear people saying that this is one of the most like believable, immersive films to come along since like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, where you could really just like
Thank you.
find yourself really getting lost in a world that is not our own, or it's like I imagine there must be a great sense of pride in that, and to have completed both films. Who knows? Potentially, Dune Messiah next. We'll see. But one of the really really exciting things too is that you're 3 for 3 with the Academy, 3 nominations, 3 Oscar wins. My friend, I'm feeling pretty good about number 4. And once again, I gotta
Thank
just
you.
say
Thank you
a
so
huge
much,
thank
Matt.
you.
Thank you so look, I try not to think about those things, but yes, thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Yeah, just keep doing what you guys are doing. It's amazing work, truly, and we're all grateful for it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right, cheers.